Well, welcome back to Talking with Tech. This is Lucas Steuber, joined as always by my colleague Rachel Madel. How are you?
I'm great.
And I'm very excited this week to welcome our good friend Kate Ahern. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So I think one easy place to start, and a lot of our audience is probably familiar with your presenting and your work, but tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got where you are.
So I started as a special education teacher, but I actually first worked with someone using AAC when I was in high school. He used one of the original light talkers from PRC, which was not a dynamic display device. It was a sequential hit device where he had to aim a beam of light at each button. And he also had a low-tech communication board. And I loved working with him and with other students like him, and that's what I went to college for. I specifically wanted to be a teacher of kids who used AAC. So I've been doing this now for way, way too long. Since like 1991, I guess, was the first AAC user I worked with when I was in high school myself.
Wow, that's great. Well, and so you just, spoke to the, some of the laser pointing stuff that used to happen. Like, there's obviously been a huge change in the technology since then. But I think another message I've even heard from you is that, good practice in the field may be technology independent in a variety of ways.
Yeah. Right? So I'm really system agnostic. I think that there are qualifications for what makes a robust system. And as long as your system has that and meets your needs, then it's the right system for you. And it really depends a lot more on how we implement and how we teach and how we support the users than it does on which system we pick.
Yeah, great. So okay, here's the tough question then, is what is your definition of a robust system?
Oh, I would have to look it up to make sure I hit all the points, but I've written about it on my blog if anybody wants to read it. But it includes, so I came up with an acronym, but I can never remember what all the things stand for. So the acronym is MegaPC, and I think it stands for, let's see, it's expandable, it is grammar. Mm-hmm. It has, it's arranged so there's a motor plan, there's pre-programmed messages for fast-moving situations and social situations. So things like going to the doctor, there's pre-programmed messages. I forget the other ones. Core vocabulary.
Yeah, that's the C.
That's the C, core vocabulary. I can't remember the M. Expandable, grammar.
I would say motor planning, but I think that's under arranged.
Oh, no, that might be motor planning, and A might be something else.
Or we've hit most of them. We've hit most of them.
We've hit
I was going to say, I've read what you've written.
You got to be able to spell. And I don't know what I put that under, but it's definitely in there.
So that's that's great. That's really useful. I'm excited that you said the pre-programmed phrases, because I worry a lot about rate enhancement, right? Especially with, obviously the focus, which I think is very positive on core language, but, sometimes it can take a while to put together phrases. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like any of that changes depending on access modality, like for an iGaze student versus direct select?
I think it depends more on the level of apraxia, and definitely changes a little bit for switch users because they're just inherently so much slower with their access just because of how switches work. But if it's a form of direct access, iGaze, touching the screen, joystick, something like that, it really just depends on the quality of the child and their apraxia and their anxiety. And but if it's a switch user, then definitely we have to pay a lot more attention to how things are arranged and making sure the most important stuff is early in the scan and they can get out of the scan to get to something else. And I think one of the things that's happened with eye gaze becoming so popular is we've forgotten we still have switch users out there.
Right.
And I think that lack of focus on switch users the past 5 years or so hasn't done any favors to the kids we have coming up who need to be learning to use switches.
Right. All right. I feel like I'm asking all the questions because I've been excited to have you on. I'm sorry, Rachel.
No worries. I actually kind of wanted to go back a little bit. So, Kate, you are a special education teacher, and you kind of knew that from that experience you had in high school. I'm curious, did you have a point in time where you were kind of deciding between, speech language pathology and special education? And explain that a little bit.
So still back in high school, so remember I'm 16, 17 making this call.
Right.
I went with my orchestra instructor and his daughter and his wife to their daughter who had complex communication needs, before we called it that, speech therapy session. And she used sign. And I saw the therapy session, and I felt like I would be good at that, but I also felt like I could make a much bigger difference 6 hours a day, 5 days a week than I could an hour a week or an hour and a half a week or whatever kids were going to be getting for speech. And to me, that felt really valuable, to be able to have that ongoing daily contact and to know that the speech therapist, the model is generally they're picking the device and they're deciding how it's used and what goes on it. It would be the teacher who was really implementing and teaching it, and in the classroom, and making sure that happened. And I really wanted more of that ongoing role, as opposed to being just sort of the consultant an hour a week. Which is ironic, since now I'm frequently the consultant.
I was just going to go back and say, it is kind of funny, it is ironic that now you're kind of doing the consultant role. When did you make that switch, and how many years were you in a classroom setting, and then,
I taught for 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I taught for 15 years. And I taught a couple years in a private hospital school.
Oh, wow.
And a couple years, so I had kids with ventilators and trachs, and some of them lived in the hospital and some of them went home. And then I taught for a couple years in a substantially separate program in a public school. And then I moved to what we call in Massachusetts a collaborative setting, which is called, an IU or a bossy, or it's got different names, different places, but here it's a collaborative. So my classroom was part of a collaborative, but it was hosted by a public school. And I did that for the last 11 years that I taught, I guess.
Wow.
But yeah, I taught for a long time. And then I moved to assistive technology, with sort of at first a 50-50 caseload between standard assistive technology, so kids with dyslexia or kids with handwriting issues, and AAC, and I just kept coming back to the most complex kids and the AAC, and started to do a lot of work in Rett syndrome and Angelman syndrome, and really looking at these kids who were had the significant apraxia and anxiety and were presumed incompetent. And that became sort of my go-to. So now all the referrals I get are those kids who are frequently presumed incompetent, and somebody has told the parents that they're not capable of doing AAC, and that's when I get a message or a phone call to come in and help. So
absolutely. I've actually, I've heard one of your talks. It was on YouTube, and you talk about that. The difference between you and other therapists is that you have that belief that, a child is capable. And, if not, it's really on you as the teacher or the therapist, how can I tap in? How can I access this child? How can I teach them?
Well, and I think it's all about presuming potential. I think when we start talking about presuming competence, people have trouble because they need to make this leap
Right.
where what they think they see in front of them doesn't match what we're asking them to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually bring it back to presume potential.
I love
What
that.
you see in front of you is not how it's going to stay forever. This child today is not who they're going to be in a year. And that's true for every single child on the planet. And I think when we start to think about it that way, and we stop asking, I want people to make the leap. I want them to presume competence. I just know that there are people I'm not going to get to do that. And for those people, I try to get them to presume potential and to realize that, whether or not you think this child is capable, it's your job to teach them. And, the other thing that I talk a lot about is building AAC, especially with kids with apraxia and anxiety, is relational.
Mm-hmm.
And, that relationship is what builds their AAC use. And I think people get really hung up on what system and on programming messages and how much should I program and how many buttons and what symbol system. And I don't think it has that much to do with that. I think as long as you're consistent and you're being thoughtful about those things, you don't need to agonize. You need to focus on building a relationship where the child wants to learn how to communicate because it's exciting to talk to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a fair amount of overlap with you in terms of the population that I work with, and then I also do a lot of Rhett and a lot of even Pitt Hopkins and Angelman. One thing I'm frankly really envious of is, what I see from your end in terms of the relationships that you've been able to build with the students and the family. That seems like what you're highlighting, more than anything. Like what percentage of your time do you think is focused on that and on the circle of support relative to like programming?
I rarely program. I mean, I program. I know how. I'm good at programming, but all robust systems come with plenty of words to work on with a kid. So
yeah, they make it easy now, huh?
They make it easy. This isn't the old days where you got a Toby P10 and there was nothing in it and you had to program it all.
Yeah, like a bag of PECs sitting on a table somewhere.
Yeah. Exactly. Everything comes with a robust vocabulary. So once you add the names of their specific people and their personal information, and then whatever they need to support anxiety or to support them emotionally for self-talk, once that's in there, it's little changes. I had a girl ask me the other day, she asked she uses a high tech and a low tech at the same time, and she between her pod book and her pod on her Toby, she asked me why she didn't have the words to talk about multiplying fractions.
Wow.
And at that point, okay, I'll give you some words to talk about multiplying fractions. But in general, I don't find a lot of need to do that.
Yeah, I've never really had to do it. So, which is an interesting question too that I fight with sometimes is, striking the balance, I guess, between access to academics and access to activities of daily living, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the schools. I don't know who would feel the same as me necessarily, but especially with some of my more impacted students, I'm way more concerned about the latter. Making sure that they're enjoying themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I used to feel that way. I think when I was teaching, I believe I was a pretty good teacher, a decent teacher, and my kids got a lot of what they needed. Once I start going into classrooms and realizing how often kids are watching movies all day, our kids with significant needs and complex needs, how often they watched a movie all day, how often they watched other people do things, how often they slept all day, how often somebody else did a craft and called it theirs. Once I started seeing that, I started to really think that, they're not learning anything there. They're not learning life skills. They're not learning academics. They're not learning anything, but people pretend that they're learning life skills and that it's a quality of life thing. And the more I see it, the more I think, it's time to teach these kids academics. Just for the mere reason that what we're doing now doesn't do anything for them. You
Right.
know, 4 hours of videos during the day at school is too much. An hour a day of video at school is too much. So, and then I started getting these kids who have been fully included for years and we're doing this amazing stuff. So I have a girl with Rett syndrome. She lives out in Missouri. Her parents moved from DC to Missouri because there was a school that would do full inclusion. And so they gave up their whole lives, high-powered jobs in DC, and moved. And the first time I met her, her mother read her, we were playing Brain Quest, and her mother read her a word problem, and it was, Joe needs to go around the track 4 times. He runs around the track once, he walks around the track twice. What fraction represents how much more he needs to go around the track? And her mother held up cards with, a 4th, an 8th, a 10th, and she used eye gaze and picked the answer, and I was astonished. And here I am, someone who presumes competence, and still I was amazed that she could do this word problem. And the more I met kids like her who were being fully included and were in those settings where people had decided to make an academic setting work, the more I realized that, we're losing kids who have potential to do so much more because they're sitting in a life skills classroom and they're not doing anything. So at the very least, I think we should be starting in inclusion, and and if there's a good reason to move away from that, then okay, let's talk about it. But I think our kids deserve to be taught academics, and I think you can have a high quality of life learning them.
Yeah.
The kids I have who are learning academics seem, on the whole, a lot happier than the kids who sit around doing nothing all day.
Yeah, no, good. You're changing my view. Although I didn't mean to imply that there shouldn't be academics,
Yeah.
Just, I guess, the balance of time spent on each one. But this is really good feedback, especially.
Well, and I think when it's done well, the academics are the tool in which you embed everything else. Right?
Gives you opportunity.
It used to be that we would do a craft or cooking activity and say we were embedding academics into that, right? So I'm doing cooking, but really I'm doing math because we're measuring things. And now it's kind of like, let's do math and embed communication into that. Let's embed social skills into that. Let's take all these other life skills and put them into math. I have a kiddo, a 6th grader who's fully included, who's really at the beginning stages of core words, right? So go, stop, up, down, look. And we spend a lot of time, working on what is his goal during this lesson. So if they're learning about ancient Egypt and he's in that classroom, what is his focus? What can he learn during that? Well, he can learn, the idea of something happening now versus something happening in the past. He can learn, so old and new. He can learn, if we're talking about how ancient Egyptians dressed, then we can talk about the clothing he wears now. If they're talking about how they built the pyramids, then a lot of his motor skills can be involved when he does a project, but he can also talk about sequencing. Anything that is how-to is a sequencing activity. So he can talk about sequencing, and he can start to learn to use his talker to say first, middle, last. So just really rethinking how we do it. We could do all those skills through cooking or a craft, but isn't it more to his benefit to be with typical peers and do that in a setting where he's learning the same skills, but through academics as the vehicle?
Yep. Great.
That being said, it's hard. It is hard to do as the kids get older and you're doing inclusion. And if there's a gap, if it widens, it's hard.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth it.
What do you think the hardest thing is for teachers when they're implementing in a classroom to help support communication? What do you think the biggest obstacle is?
I think it's the concept of modeling and not expecting anything back.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Teachers and speech therapists, we like our data, and we want to be able to prove that what we're doing works, and we don't want to be able to prove it in 6 months. We want to be able to prove it today.
Now. Yeah.
Now, and that is not how AAC works.
Mm-hmm.
And people have a really tough time with, you're going to model and you're not going to expect anything back right away. I think teachers have a really hard time with that. And I think that sometimes they have a hard time with changing how they do things. So they've always done things a certain way, and they don't want to do it differently, and then they cling to their old beliefs. And again, I think this is true for teachers and speech therapists. So, anyone who went to school a while ago, or anyone who went to school now but who had a professor who went to school a while ago, is going to believe that we have to start with 2 symbols and earn the right to 4 and earn the right to 8. And when we are placed with a child who we don't feel comfortable, we don't know what to do, we cling to what we were taught in college.
Mm-hmm.
So we run back to, all right, we're going to do a choice of 2. And it's really hard for us to let go and say, no, we're going to do a robust core system and model. Because that's hard, because you can't take data on that right away. Well, you can, but you'd have to take data on different stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, teachers and speech therapists in the school setting, they just feel such pressure from the IEP goals. It's like, we have to show that they're making progress, and I think that's, obviously it's a necessary evil. We need to have those goals. We need to take data, but like you said, it's not something that happens overnight. So we kind of have to start reframing, what we're taking data on.
Exactly.
Well,
can we take data on being responsive to modeling?
Mm-hmm.
So, are they looking? Are they paying attention? Is there an increased understanding of receptive language when we model? Let's take data on that instead of choosing from a field of 2. Or, let's take data on how many functions the child is using, instead of, are they making a 3-word utterance? Let's take, so I think it's about shifting how we do things, but you have to have enough knowledge of how things work to be able to make the shift.
Right. And you have to have faith that it will work, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's an interesting point too. I mean, one experience I've had, especially in consulting, is getting feedback from teachers or SLPs in the schools that that I haven't struck an appropriate balance between a goal that presumes competence and a goal that's setting them up to fail. Right. I mean, often they'll want a lower bar than I do, because then they're able to, collect that data and look like there's progress and these other things. I don't know if that's something that you've experienced too, but it's tough, Yeah.
I mean, I think when I'm working with an excellent teacher, I don't care what the goals are, because I know they're doing the right thing regardless of what's written on the paper. I think a lot of people get hung up on the goals when you're not working with a good teacher or a good therapist, because what else do parents have to keep us accountable? But when I'm in a classroom and I know that teacher gets it, and I know that therapist gets it and the team gets it, I don't worry that much about the goals. But it's tough when I go in and I say, I want them to use 4 different purposes of communication over the course of a week. And then, they're like, they just don't understand why I would want that to be the goal. I have a bad habit of people leave IEPs near me. And once I pick it up, I can't help myself and I rewrite it. So it's a little joke between the parents that they'll just invite me to stay after the session for tea, and then just put the IEP near me, and then I just can't help it.
That's great. I can totally relate with that.
So a lot of times I have parents who walk into the IEP meeting with the goals that I already wrote. And a lot of places will go with that. You know, if I manage to keep it at a place where they think it's possible for the child to do it. But most of the time people just haven't thought about other ways to collect data.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they haven't thought about that they could do language samples or look at functions versus picking out the right symbol, or, you know, how to collect data without testing.
We'll be back with Kate Ahern right after this break. So we know that the end of the year is coming up for everyone, which means that it's that time where you should be maybe worrying a little bit about continuing education credits. So we've been thinking about that ourselves, and we actually were able to line up a pretty great deal with MedBridge. So rather than $425 for a year for their premium subscription, we were actually able to line up $95 a year. So it's a $300 discount, which is like amazing, right? So if you go to medbridgeeducation.com, you can put in the promo code Talking with Tech, and Tech is all uppercase. I'm actually not sure if that matters, but Tech's all uppercase. Again, promo code Talking with Tech, and that'll get you the $95 price, which includes a lot of pretty awesome stuff. Like if you're listening to us because you're into AAC, there's a great presentation by John McCarthy out of Ohio University, a whole big series about pediatric intervention. I know, Rachel, you found one too.
Yeah, I'm really excited. There's one by Laura DeThorne. She's out of the University of Illinois. It's called Eyes on the Prize, Communicative Competence in Children. So I'm just always kind of a big believer in supporting the presumption of competence. So I think that could be a really good one for
That's great. Well, and there's 365 total SLP courses, so there's a ton there. There's also a lot of stuff that you might encounter with your practice along with AAC, like dysphagia, other things. There's some great education. The other thing that's really neat is that because it's the $425 subscription that we're getting for $95, you have access to their whole patient education library, which has a whole bunch of materials that you can hand out to families that you work with. So we're really excited about this. So go to medbridgeeducation.com, use the promo code Talking with Tech, and you'll get this really amazing discount. And I wanted to ask, and I know I want to honor your time too. We've had a great conversation here, but outside of modeling, what's one thing that everyone could do better, do you think?
I think that they could be better. So specifically thinking of the population that I tend to work with, I think that they could do better on using traditional special ed support tools to support language and anxiety management and self-talk. So I do a lot with social stories around language and things you can say in various situations. I do a lot with video models. I do a lot with visual supports around AAC, and these are tools that AAC people don't think about very much, but SPED teachers, you know, we spend a lot of time on that in graduate school on these various supports we can use, and they work beautifully with a lot of our populations for language stuff and for behavior and anxiety and stuff that impacts language. And I don't see people using it very often. I don't see, you know, people say to me, well, what do I do when he stims on the device? Well, and then they focus on, do I take it away? Well, why are you focusing on the consequence of the behavior?
Mm-hmm.
Let's focus on the antecedent, and let's focus on replacement behaviors. Because if you focus on those, maybe you don't need to worry about a consequence because the behavior will decrease. So can you write a social story that talks about, you know, my talker is for talking and not for making funny noises? Or can you write, make a visual support that says, if I want to hear a button over and over, I turn the volume down to whisper? Or, you know, what can we do at the antecedent level and at the behavior level with all of these amazing tools we have as educators and as speech therapists, instead of always jumping to take it away or give them less words or hide buttons.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I guess that would be, let's use all the tools in our toolbox would be the thing we could do better.
That's great. And it would be just based on my experience, that's not something that SLPs are exposed to as much in their education, so that's something they have to learn from learn from teachers,
Well, you'll see a goal that the child will carry their device from activity to activity, and which is great, but the only tool being used to teach that is prompting. So carry your device, get your device, bring your device. Why don't we have a social story, or I've written a social story called I Wear My Words, that lets kids see lots of other kids wearing and carrying their devices and talking about how important it is to have our words with us. Let's make videos where they can see themselves carrying their words. Let's have visual supports on their desk that says, don't forget your talker, take your words with you. And use these other tools besides prompting and besides that sort of thing. And I think sometimes we forget to use the tools that we have.
Yeah, I think we're in such a kind of a high-tech world that we forget the power of low-tech supports. I'm always kind of trying to encourage teachers and parents to not, constantly be verbally prompting kids. I feel like these kids get told what to do all day long. So if we can have a visual support on their desk that tells them, or cues them or reminds them to, not to forget their device, I feel like that's so much better than constantly telling them what to do.
Well, I don't need to go through insurance to fund a laminated piece of paper either. So
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you can put, if you really feel like you need to be high tech, if there are ways to do these things high tech.
Yep.
They're not necessary a lot of the time, but I had a mom so I just spoke last weekend at the Angelman syndrome, their Foundation for Angelman Syndrome Therapeutics event, and the whole day was about anxiety, behavior, and communication, and other tools to deal with that. And I had a mom contact me after on Facebook Messenger, and she hadn't actually seen the sessions. So she's asking me all these questions, and at some point I realized I answered all these questions in the presentation. I sent her the YouTube link, but the big thing she kept telling me was, my son's fine as long as I'm there. Okay, so let's think about any other kid. We would give them a transitional object, right? A picture of mom, a teddy bear, something that allows them to remember mom when she's not there. So some of this is, it doesn't have to be some complex thing on their talker. It can be, have a picture of mom and teach him to look at it when he feels anxious.
Yeah.
Right.
Simple as that.
I think I need that, but it'd be like my cat or something. Maybe not my cat. He's sometimes inspires anxiety, but another thing, you're always great with these pithy statements. I've been sitting here musing over the I Wear My Words book. I just love that name. But then I also love the name. You have your Facebook group. It's Motivate, Model, and Move Out of the Way. I've shamelessly quoted that a number of times. And then I believe you did the the See My AAC.
Yeah, that's mine too.
Well. So that was, and that's.
And we're in the middle of 12 days of modeling, another contest.
Oh, great!
So I'm trying to do a contest every few months. For Halloween we did See My AAC TOT for Trick or Treat, and I wanted to see kids in costumes with their talkers. So we had a contest, and AbleNet gave us prizes, and Rhett University gave us prizes, and we got tons of pictures of kids in costumes with their communication systems. So right now we're doing See My AAC, and then hashtag 12 days of modeling. So we're asking parents to post over the course of December 12 pictures on 12 different days that shows the modeling. And then we'll have a drawing actually for a iPad harness so kids can wear their words.
Full circle.
But I think the joy of being a SPED teacher is we're all about simplifying things down, and that doesn't stop when you stop teaching. So my family will joke that when I ask for something, I'll say, would you please get me X? It is in the left-hand cabinet on the second shelf, and it is labeled spices on the cabinet. And they'll be like, you just said, get me the cinnamon. but I'm a SPED teacher. I can't help but be, very clear but simple and, specific. And that's many years of teaching special education. So
that's what it'll do to you.
Great. I need more of that. I really need more of those kind of directions in my life. So. Well, I know that you have some clients, you said, so I don't want to take your whole morning, but thank you so very much for speaking with us. I think this was really helpful. To anyone listening out there, please do obviously check out Kate's Facebook group, and there's a million different videos that you've done out there and other things. Again, I just really appreciate it. Anything else?
No, thank you for having me. And I think it's great that there's so many resources out there for people pursuing AAC with, as a speech therapist or as a teacher or as a parent. Or, one of my sort of greatest moments is I presented at the New England Assistive Technology Conference and talked about apraxia and assistive technology. And there was a woman in the audience who is autistic and sometimes is able to speak and sometimes isn't. And nobody had ever explained to her that was called apraxia. And nobody had ever explained why it got worse when she was anxious. So she's a part-time AAC user, but she didn't nobody had ever taught her that. And obviously that's not a population. I mean, she's in college and she works as a TA, and sometimes she teaches math, and so she does this complex math, and sometimes she's using AAC to do it. And I had, it's not a population I've ever worked with, but I think it's great the way that the work we do, you never know where it's going to reach. So, I'm just glad that resources like the podcast and other places exist so that people can get the information you need, and you never know who's going to need it and how it's going to affect them.
Right. Good. Wow. You said you liked the podcast. That's all I wanted to hear today. Thanks so much again for your time. And
you're welcome.
Again, Lucas Steuber and Rachel Madel and Kate Ahern for Talking with Tech. Anyone listening, please do, again, check out her resources and keep listening. So thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're like an AAC celebrity, Kate.
People tell me that and I don't get it. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like, I'm just trying to get through my day. Show up on time periodically for stuff.
I totally get that.
When people tell me, you're a celebrity, or a lot of women will tell me I'm fangirling, and I'll be like, I don't understand why. Yep. I do have a request. If anybody feels like they want to message me and ask me to do something for you, please start with hello.
Back to basics.
To help you out, if you start with a hello and not just jump into here's the 9 things I need you as a stranger.
Yeah, the 5,000 word narrative of whatever. Yep. Yep. Totally.
I'm sorry this is so long. When it starts with that, I'm oh no.
Yeah, here it comes. Yep.
And I try to help everybody who reaches out, but there are moments when I feel like everybody wants something from me.
You do a lot of presenting, certainly.
I do a lot of presenting.
Yep.
And I joke, like, last time I presented, after I presented, there was a line like 10 people deep of people who wanted to ask me questions. And I started telling them that, it was going to cost them a vodka tonic at the and it was an open bar. So all they actually had to do was get it and bring it to me. Nobody did vodka tonic.
Nobody did it? Oh.
I never had a vodka tonic that night at all, actually.
We will get you a vodka tonic.